All right, I wanted to lead into this and just start talking about why we're going to be looking at the history of art objects. Why is it important for us to know the backstory on some of these things? Where I want to start is just talking about, ourselves, how we experience things, and maybe we can get some insight based on that. So, if we understand that everything we know about ourselves and the world is shaped by our histories, then we know that something similar is going to be happening with objects. How we perceive them now may be different from how they were actually perceived when they were created. Um, but let's get back to this. How do our histories shape us? I mean, if you think about being born in the United States, it's going to change the way you view the world. You're going to view the world a little bit differently than someone who was raised in China. You're just going to look at things differently because of the way that we interact with things like language, history. Our history books might not say the same thing as another country's. It might present a story a little bit differently or focus on an area um, more in one than the other. So, with that understood, everything is understood within this specific context. So, a specific time or place is what I mean by context. When you see, touch, think, remember, invent, you do so in and by using our cultural symbols, language, for example. I mean, that is one of the things that is going to shape that. I mean, think about today some of the things that the words that we use that may be inexplicable to people in the future, or people from the past if they were able to look ahead. Text me, okay? Text me. Maybe even 10 years ago that didn't even exist. Unfriend. You know exactly what I mean. If I said I unfriended so and so, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Facebook. Cyberbullying. Okay, some of these concepts, some of these terms, people understand them in our culture. There might even be sayings that you hear on the TV or in music that as soon as I use that term, you're going to know that association if you are in that specific time and place. Now, art holds a visible and privileged place within our society. I mean, just look at the cost of art objects. I mean, art is one of the, you know, um, things that we create that holds some of the highest value. When we create it, doesn't really specifically have any value. It's the value that we attach to it. To start questioning art and to try to see that it has this specific history, that it belongs to a specific time, can start to tell us a lot about ourselves today. So let's get started here. All right. Many of you guys might not remember this, but during the 90s, we got into a conflict. Well, actually, we intervened in a conflict. The Iraqis invaded, with Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And basically, the U.S. kind of stepped in. But as this story kind of, as you can see in this little excerpt from the New York Times, it was something of a contentious event. Bombs falling on historical sites. I mean, this area of the world, which is modern-day Iraq, is what was at one time a region that we referred to as Mesopotamia, okay, the land between the rivers. Uh, this fertile area is where civilization began. That's why we have that name, the cradle of civilization, is because the first cities evolved in this area. There are 500,000 archaeological sites in this area, and it says in the article 50,000 that are very important. Okay, some of them you might recognize, like Nineveh or Babylon, but some of them haven't even been discovered. We know that they're there somewhere, but not necessarily sure exactly where. So it really divided art historians and archaeologists. What they were kind of wondering what to do about this. How do you protect that land? How do you protect those cities that within them have historical sites that are important to all mankind. This is Mesopotamia, satellite picture. The Euphrates is the one that's on the bottom. You can see the river coming in from the right side, moving to the left, and the one that kind of moves up above and creates kind of that V on its side is the Tigris. Here's a map showing some of these early sites. Notice down on the bottom right we have Uruk, Babylon. Those are some important places. Up in the Assyrian region, you'll see Nineveh. This is 1200 BC, so some of these cities are a lot older than this. I guess I should say BCE, before the Common era is what we use now when we're talking about time. Here's an artist's rendering of Eridu, one of the first cities. And when we start to talk about cities, there were obviously villages that existed, but cities, organized, urban living, buildings, taverns. I mean, this is like city life. It's not the village. It's more complex than that. People are living in close proximity to one another. People are not out, gardening because they're living right next to each other. They have other occupations, other ways of earning income so that they can buy food. So this is just a total, revolution in how people live and interact with one another. Uruk, this is the famed city of the king Gilgamesh that was recounted in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Kind of talks about this early hero. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a written story and is the first and earliest recorded or written story on record. It was actually discovered until I think the 1850s. But this is the city that that Gilgamesh ruled. And you can see on the right from current pictures, the artist is maybe taking some liberties. This is what he imagines the city to look like. But this is some of the structures that have been unearthed today on the right side there. Babylon, another famous ancient site. We have an artist's rendering of the Tower of Babel. If you remember from biblical descriptions, this was the tower that was, being built to reach up into the heavens. On the right, we have top right, we have a modern day reconstruction. They're reconstructing the old city walls here. On the lower right is an actual picture of the tiles taken from the gates of Babylon. Okay, so the gates to this city, walled city, were these impressive gates. Take a look at the figures in the picture. They are minuscule in compared to that entryway. So as you're walking up this causeway towards the entrance, or across this bridge towards the entrance to this city, you're seeing these gates, and there was a set of two, and they were just huge, monumental, and they were meant to really kind of show the power of the city, maybe kind of produce some awe as you're entering that city. Now, the artist rendering of the Tower of Babylon looks more like a Colosseum than an actual, what it may have been. Like, it may have been something like a ziggurat. This ziggurat here is from 21st century BCE, and this is basically it looks pyramidal, but it's not a pyramid. This is actually like a temple. So it's more along the lines of something you would see in ancient Mesoamerica, where ascending through these stairs is almost symbolic of rising up to heaven. These were supposed to be like bridges between earth and the heavens. So very similar to what is being described in the Tower of Babel. So what we're seeing is, again, it's a temple, so it's not a burial place. There would be priests that were allowed to enter these holy spaces, but not. Interesting thing, you may notice there's some small figures in the pictures. Those small figures are actually U.S. soldiers in Iraq, kind of doing some sightseeing, and that's where most of the best pictures of these contemporary sites are coming from. Mesopotamia, since it was the first cities, they did need to develop some new technologies. There are a lot of firsts that came about in Mesopotamia. We're looking at what's called a cylinder seal. These are about maybe anywhere from like an inch tall to an inch and a half tall, carved stone, and there's an incised or design carved into the stone. It's almost like a bead, and that bead is then rolled through clay, and you can see that it leaves an impression. On the right is an impression. This is what's called, a cylinder seal. Okay, if you think of seals, it's much like a chop, where you're stamping something to show that, in the case of ceramics, we're stamping our pots to show that we've made them. In this case, we would roll the seal through the clay to, create our signature. Some of these are very, very intricate. Writing, I mean, this is where we see writing actually become manifest. So what we're looking at is cuneiform, which is just Latin for wedge-shaped, because they used a wedge-shaped reed to press these marks into clay tablets. Okay, clay plays a huge part in Mesopotamian myth and in culture. So here it's like an early form of paper in a way. You're recording these different ideas, stories. It may be a shopping list. Okay, maybe not a shopping list, but maybe people, business deals, interactions, things that would need to be kind of remembered. So you can see that areas are broken down into little segments. Those may be individual words or things put together. If you look on the top, there's some different iterations. It started as like a pictogram, so a picture, and evolved into a more abstract rendering as it gets further to the right. Some of the other firsts I should mention that are interesting is math. Obviously, if we're dealing with crops and storing and transactions and that we would need math. So the first number symbols appear. We also have the 60-minute, or not 60-minute, but 60-unit breakdown of time, which is still with us today in the seconds, minutes. So kind of an interesting piece there. Also, astronomy was first seen here as well. So a lot of firsts. They say the wheel, but I mean it's that I think may be contentious. But the potter's wheel definitely shows up and really has an impact on the pottery that comes out of this region. Well, this museum that we're looking at, we're going to flip back, houses this particular famous antiquity. It is a large vase called the Warka vase, and this particular vase is carved out of stone, alabaster, which is a very light, like white color stone, kind of creamy white. And this piece is kind of important because it tells us a little bit about the religious beliefs of this particular time period. This is the Sumerian cosmology. Okay, this is, I believe, discovered in Ur, and what we're seeing here, and we can kind of look at the drawing on the right, is crops are represented on the bottom. Okay, in what's called a register or a band that wraps around. We call those registers when we're talking about sculpture of this type. So we have a register running around the bottom that has crops being represented there. A little bit smaller, we have some animals above that. The next register is a series of what appear to be small figures, and from what I understand are priests carrying offerings of food. So it could be, what we're seeing below, animals, bread, grains, things like that are being offered in the top register to a priestess or goddess. It could be a representation of a goddess, or it could be a priestess representing that god. And we have a high priest that is up there taking part in this particular ceremony.